Hello, my name is Scott Hicks. I'm Director of the Teaching and Learning Center at UNC Pembroke. I'm happy to be joined for today's celebration of teaching and learning by Dr. David Nikkel, Professor of Religion and Chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religion. Dr. Nikkel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Scott, for having me and doing this with the Teaching and Learning Center.
We're glad you're here. So, who's the best teacher you've ever had and why?
I would say my main mentor in my PhD program in religious studies at Duke University. His name was Bill Poteet, William Poteet, and he really did use a Socratic kind of method in classes. Of course, these were graduate student in small classes, so very conducive for good discussion with relatively few people. But he would well, to back up, because his work mainly concerned certain thinkers who were challenging traditional Western philosophical, religious ways of looking at the human being, which tend to be more dualistic, kind of one way or other, ignoring the body in favor of kind of a disconnected mind, making things very abstract and all of that. And so he was attracted to thinkers who were more holistic in terms of the whole integration of the whole human person. In fact, he coined the term mind body with no hyphens, nothing in between, just one word to get across the idea that we are embodied minds, or mind bodies. But a lot of us were, whether tacitly and directly or more directly influenced by the Western traditions. Sometimes we would have problems with some of the things we were reading, and he kind of said, so what's your problem with this? And he would encourage as we were understanding things, and just as I said, employ that Socratic method of drawing students out and encouraging discussion. And for the humanities, anyway, that I think that is so central to the humanities to have good discussions and deep discussions.
So, what does it take to be a good professor of higher education in 2021?
Well, yeah, there's of course a lot of things, but and being able to some degree to use the new technologies, the electronic technologies can be important, as of course we all found out, some of us rudely with the pandemic, when we suddenly had to convert to all online for the rest of the last year spring semester. And it that one thing that did get me used to doing synchronous classes online, which I had not done before. I had developed an asynchronous online course in which I very much tried to encourage discussion, which can be difficult to get deep discussion especially in an asynchronous class. And speak about that, that's something I really worked on to encourage the students to not treat this as a home. I would give questions on paintings from works of art from Western history, and lots of questions to suggest ways discussion could go. But some students have a tendency, oh, this is homework, I'm just going to answer the question that was already answered by 5 other students. So I had to do a lot of work to try to make it approximate a synchronous discussion with give and take as much as possible. And has succeeded, and not that everyone gets it, but it's improved a lot to as far as asynchronous discussions, and kind of working at the trying to have discussions, synchronous discussions online. Of course, as a general rule, maybe even more online. Uh, the smaller the class, the more likely you are to get good discussion involving a lot of people, and back and forth, developing lines of dialogue, and all of that. But these electronic things, mixing things up using some videos, and polling, kind of, using some of the electronic tools. But I think in the humanities, it still, comes down to um, speaking well, in discussion. I mean, some lecture, because students need the background, but the ideal is to be able to bounce off of our reading and any lecturing with good discussion on the text or the topics we're dealing with. So I guess the more things change, some things, even in 2021, remain the same.
Tell us a story about something creative you've done to engage your students.
Yeah, I mean, uh, so some of the things are what I've talked about to try to encourage good discussions, which can be kind of, sometimes difficult in larger classes, gen ed classes. I've I've one thing I tried was kind of a jigsaw thing, which where students break into different groups, and each each student becomes an expert on one of the questions, which I thought actually worked pretty well. But a lot of students didn't like it because they were dependent on other students who, who didn't always maybe present the material as well as they would have liked it. But that was a one strategy. I sometimes will have students answer questions. This is in a capstone course in class, where they're trying to remember it, and usually closed books, or they're trying to remember it, but then we talk about it afterwards. But they have already brought a lot of thinking to the discussion. Um, Sometimes well, in a class I'm teaching for the first time this semester, um, I'm emphasizing much more practices of Asian religions. I've taught an upper level class many times where we focus mostly on sacred or religious philosophical texts from different Asian philosophical and religious traditions. And not that we neglected ethical or ritual aspects totally, but the focus was on the text. Whereas in this class, I'm focusing more on practices. I kind of stole the idea from a religion professor at UNC Wilmington, right, that presented at the big annual meeting several years ago. But one of the things that students do is to take on certain practices in the tradition of Taoism, in the tradition of Hinduism, and so on, Confucianism. Like the first religion we studied was Confucianism, so they had options of like sitting straight, looking people in the eye, staying off your social media when you're with others, and other things along those lines of trying to practice Li and humane behavior, proper and humane behavior in and proper behavior in the Confucian tradition. Just one example, but and then we discuss it, and I call on the students to I take notes on what they wrote and kind of highlight, okay, tell us about this very interesting practice and how you found it, whether it's difficult or easy, what kind of feelings, what kind of learnings. And someone say, I really appreciate this. I'm going to continue to do this type of thing. Also, this class actually uses surveys about attitudes from the different Asian traditions, and they respond on their own take on these attitudes, how much they like or find important or not so much, agree, disagree, and so on. And again, I talk about, okay, as a class, we kind of, we're here and there, and then encourage discussion. Okay, why did you, you know, answer the way you did? So I guess I just try to find different ways to encourage discussion of the topics, of the ideas, of the practices we're dealing with.
Making learning real.
Yeah, I try.
Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Nikkel.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Hicks.